You're watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. One of the regulated digital asset exchange in Malaysia, Luno, has done a survey basically asking Malaysians what they think about money. Some of the findings are quite interesting, including that of 60% of Malaysians say that the most important purpose of having money is to safeguard their family's long-term well-being. Another finding shows 62% of Malaysian investors stated that they would consider investing in digital assets to diversify their portfolios in the future. Ironically, I am one of those 62%, therefore, trying to think about my options on digital assets. So what better conversation to have other than with Aaron Tang, the Luno Malaysia Country Manager. How are you, Aaron?
Hi, Ibrahim. Thanks for having me. I'm very good. Thank you.
Right, let's talk about the regulatory aspect first. So Luno is one of the 4 regulated digital asset exchange as sanctioned by the Securities Commission. But we also want to know more about Luno per se before we can continue on this conversation. Go ahead, Aaron.
Right. Thanks, Ibrahim. So Luno is the first digital asset exchange that was approved in Malaysia. This was back in October 2019. Our whole objective is to make it safe and easy for Malaysians to invest into digital assets and cryptocurrencies. So we have 5 digital assets on our platform. This is Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum, Litecoin, and XRP, which some people normally call Ripple.
But you're not the only one in Malaysia. I've had 1 or 2 others on the show as well. Not wanting to toot your own horn, but how are you guys different from one over the other?
Right. I think our USP or unique selling proposition really, Ibrahim, is that we want to make it as safe and easy as possible. And when I say as easy as possible, this means things, for example, like making the barrier to entry really low. For example, you can get started on Luno with as low as RM1, which is a really, really low barrier for entry. And then on top of that, we also focus a lot on education-related material. So if you check out our app, our website, you don't actually need to even sign up. There's a ton of educational material for free, which we think is the right way to grow this ecosystem in a safe and responsible manner.
Speaking about growing the ecosystem, the element of safeguarding the investors' investments and also trying to understand what the recourse could be if investors find themselves in a quandary, all that is, of course, quite high in the eyes of the requirements by the Securities Commission. Would you be kind enough to share some of the KYC tasks that you do before enrolling a particular customer and the kind of recourse that they have in store for them in case they need to find some legal remedy to their quandary?
Right. So when you mention KYC is also known as Know Your Customer. So it is a standard procedure for any financial institution before they want to get a customer onto their platform. So this involves things like asking for the customer's name. It involves things like asking for the customer's selfie, a picture of the customer, and also some copies of their identification card or passport or driver's license. So these are standard procedures, and the reason why these measures are in place is because we just want to ensure that all these financial platforms in the country, not just the digital asset exchanges, but any other financial platforms, we want to ensure that we don't have any form of criminal activity or, for example, people who aren't using it for the right purpose, using the platforms. So that's the KYC procedures. And it's very similar to, for example, signing up for an e-wallet or any other financial service. Now, the other question that you mentioned was around recourse in case investors have any trouble. So the regulated digital asset exchanges in Malaysia, all 4 of them, they are local regulated companies, meaning that they have a local office here. The details of their directors are on the SE website. For example, if anyone has a serious issue, and then it's of course possible to contact these digital asset exchanges by referring to either their help center or their support. You can always get support there. And last of all, in case people continue to have trouble, if you're not able to solve your problems, you can of course reach out to the regulators themselves, because the digital asset exchanges locally we also need to report to the regulators, which is basically the Securities Commission.
Okay, let's jump straight into the survey that you guys have done. I believe you guys did this survey with Jirnexu, with a good friend of the show as well, Han Tan. Let's talk a little bit more about the Han Liu, pardon me. Let's talk a little bit more about the survey itself. We all know that whole statement that the financial literacy amongst Malaysians are actually lower compared to our counterparts, but it's actually, there's a little bit more color there. Folks in KL probably would have a higher financial literacy compared to other places in the country. And of course, when you slice and dice it even further, the young Malaysians might probably have a different amount of financial literacy compared to older generation. But generally speaking, there is an opportunity for us to improve on not just the financial literacy aspect of regular Malaysians, but of course the kind of investment literacy as well. And that's something that I want to focus on very shortly. But for now, can you go through with us some of the top line findings of your survey?
Right. So very interestingly, when we ran our survey, and this survey was done for more than 1,000 Malaysians, and it is a statistically accurate representation, meaning to say we didn't just survey people in the Klang Valley, or we didn't just survey people who are highly literate in the 25 to 30-year-old group. So we aim for a survey that was statistically accurate, which means we went to the East Coast, we surveyed people from the northern region, we surveyed people from Borneo as well, across multiple age groups and genders. So some interesting statistics that we found: 64% of respondents actually stated that they save their money often. So Malaysians, you would think are actually natural savers. As to whether they are natural investors, that's a question perhaps we can address later. But that was something very interesting I found. The number one reason for Malaysians saving money was actually because they view wealth as an important catalyst in attaining greater financial freedom for both themselves and the families. So the second point which I want to bring up was that 58% of respondents actually stated that having a financially flexible lifestyle in the future was very important. So when we talk about financially flexible lifestyle, this could mean things like having lifestyle choices, for example, where they stay, the choice of their vehicle, for example. So we found overall that Malaysians are generally aware of saving and investing. That being said, we do believe that financial education and awareness are still lacking, and we can do a lot more to help here.
I find it interesting, not just interesting, I find it hard to believe, to be frank. That's the word I'm looking for. That 64% of Malaysians are savers, and it points to the fact that 2 in 3 Malaysians are doing this. Therefore, you can broadly conclude that saving is a culture amongst Malaysians. Is this a surprising finding for you?
I don't think it was surprising in the sense that, in our culture, we are regularly told to save. We're regularly, even our parents tell us the importance of saving. Even in for example, the proverbs that we've grown up with, for example, sikit-sikit, lama-lama jadi bukit. These are all ingrained in our culture. What was surprising to me was the high percentage. 64% is pretty high, really. But
yeah,
I think maybe it's not just, even if you're saving 5 ringgit a month, that's regular savings, right? But
yeah,
I think the problem many Malaysians find today, many Malaysians struggle today, is perhaps not that they can't save, but the amount of money that they can save.
Okay, that's of course another debate, because which is a debate close to my heart. We're talking about wage as an issue, a perennial issue in Malaysia. You get less and less money for fresh graduates as the years go by. But we don't want to lose track on the topic of the day, which is of course increasing wealth, diversifying the type of investments. But is this 64% a little bit different from our compatriots in the region? Do you have data across the region as well?
When we ran this survey, we actually surveyed it across multiple countries that Luno is active in.
Okay.
So this was across countries like the UK, South Africa. We also surveyed people in Nigeria, for example. I don't exactly have the figures of how Malaysia compares to the rest of the countries. However, I will say that we are in the higher higher percentage of people who are saving versus the other countries.
Okay. The second point, which is of course being financially flexible and having that as a lifestyle. Do you feel that that is a key component when financial providers like yourselves think about trying to serve the community, that a little bit more flexibility in terms of the financial products is actually essential to not just capturing new customers but retaining them as well?
Yes, 100%. So I think what we offer here is basically access to digital assets. Now, when you save and invest, you basically have so many choices, right? You can invest, for example, in amanah saham, or you can choose to invest in fixed deposits. What we're really providing here is another option, another flexible option for people to actually give a try if they haven't started yet. And I think that's where the whole promise of fintech really brings to regular Malaysians, right? It's not just about forcing people to save or invest in the old ways, but giving people more access, more options, and hopefully these options can be used to achieve a better financial future.
Okay, we'll go for one short break before we jump straight into the topic of crypto. We'll be right back after these messages. Thanks for staying on with us. I have with me Aaron Tang, the Luno Malaysia Country Manager. We're talking about not just a survey that they've done, but of course what can be thought of when we as investors think about trying to diversify our portfolio. Aaron, there is a old adage where we talk about all the time. We need to diversify our investments. We need to lower the risk profile of our investment portfolio. And the strange part is this: when everybody diversifies, and we've seen this empirically in the US, where everybody diversifies in the equities. Suddenly everything is correlated with each other, and this include investments in crypto as well. Early on in the pandemic in March last year or April last year, when stocks took a hit, the prices of some coins actually dropped as well, in tandem with that of the equity market. It's not a reflection of how good or how bad the one type of investment is over the other, but because of everything being so correlated with each other, it becomes quite problematic for us to not try to be correlated in terms of one investment portfolio over the other. Do you feel that, and of course that's in the US, but I don't know whether the same thing is here, it's happening here in Malaysia. We kind of know that the equities is less of an exposure, particularly to retail investors. Maybe things have changed over the past year or so. Bursa Malaysia did show a record rise in CDS trading account, so indicatingly showing that Malaysians are a little bit, or retail Malaysians are a little bit more interested in trying to invest in the retail equities. But generally speaking, do you feel that investing in crypto is a little bit more independent and a little bit more desegregated compared to being correlated with all the other types of investments, including that of investing in retail equities?
Yeah, 100%, Ibrahim. So if we look at specifically that period of March 2020 when everything dropped, I would say that that's actually been one of the, I would say, exceptions in Bitcoin's performance. Because if you look at the historical performance of Bitcoin, it has traditionally had a very low correlation with any other asset class, whether that's US equities or real estate or gold or real estate. So I think that was perhaps an anomaly. I think that was a period where everyone was feeling uncertain about everything. But again, if you look at the long-term performance, particularly of Bitcoin, it has shown low correlation. And that's why a lot of investors today are interested to add that to their portfolio just to diversify. And that includes not just retail investors, but also institutional investors, large companies doing it.
There is also that element of what type of cryptocurrency that one needs to think about. particularly when you jump on your exchange. There's a lot to choose from. How do you help investors decide one over the other?
Yeah. So when it comes to cryptocurrencies, the general understanding is that the really truly tried and established cryptocurrencies are Bitcoin and to a lesser extent Ethereum. So I would recommend that if any investor is starting to look into cryptocurrencies, they should start with one of those. And the reason is simple, because these cryptocurrencies have been around for the longest, and they also have the most amount of educational material, even analyst reports written about them. So I think they're a good starting point. Now, just to note on that, in Malaysia, we only have 5 cryptocurrencies which are approved for trading in Malaysia, and this is by both the digital asset exchanges and also the Securities Commission. And I believe it is everybody's joint intent to not quickly allow too much exposure into, for example, something that's very speculative or something that's very high risk. So, for example, you may not see a very memeish kind of joke kind of cryptocurrency traded in Malaysia on the regulated exchanges, because I think we all agree that something like this may be overly speculative for the market right now.
And then that is, of course, the next topic of conversation that I want to drive at, which is prices can't just go up all the time to a point where it goes up indefinitely. It has to level off, or am I reading this wrong?
You're reading this right in saying that prices cannot go up forever indefinitely. That's 100% true in any investment. And I think cryptocurrency investors have to understand that cryptocurrencies are today still a high volatility kind of asset. So that means you could potentially, for example, Bitcoin, I think, did 300% in the last 1 year. So something that can go up 300% in 1 year can also potentially lose a lot of value in a short period of time. So I think investors do need to keep this in mind. We're never going to be saying that, invest in Bitcoin, crypto, put all your money there because 100% you're going to make money all the time, right? I think people should understand that these kinds of investments come with risks, and they should size their allocation accordingly so they did not take on too much risk.
The thing that I'm still trying to grasp is that Bitcoin is not just a medium of payment, it's also a medium of investment, which I find strangely unique, because if you invest in stocks, you're actually buying a piece of the company, and the company tries to make profit or not, or you support the underlying theme of the business or the sector that the business is in. You don't invest in money. I mean, this is the part where I'm trying to grasp on why should I move away from unit trust or ETFs or all the other stuff that I'm familiar with into Bitcoin. Maybe you can help me on this.
Yeah. So while cryptocurrencies were designed as a medium of payment, for example, when Bitcoin was designed, it was actually designed to be some sort of digital cash. So people would imagine using Bitcoin for paying for coffee in Starbucks, for example. Now, while that is happening slowly already in some parts of the world, for example, in El Salvador, they made Bitcoin legal tender recently. What we've seen is that the adoption of Bitcoin or crypto as a means of payment has not taken off very in an advanced way yet, right? It's still right at the beginnings, I think, because the infrastructure is still being worked on. But what we're seeing today is cryptocurrencies are being used primarily as a form of investment. So when you're investing into cryptocurrencies, something that I mentioned earlier, not only do you have the potential for higher gains versus other investment asset classes, you also have the opportunity to diversify your portfolio, adding something that is lowly correlated with all the other asset classes. And something that I discussed with Han Liu in our media session the other day, where Han actually mentioned that adding a little bit of Bitcoin or crypto into your portfolio may actually reduce the overall volatility because you've added something into the mix, which is actually or rather lowly correlated with everything else. So this is a bit of, I guess you can say, even I was a bit surprised when I heard it, right? Because when normally you think of Bitcoin, you think high volatility, higher risk, and higher return. But actually, if you just size it, maybe, for example, just 1% or 3% into your portfolio, you may actually be improving your overall portfolio.
Okay, a person like me, I don't like to think about my investments all the time. I have a day job, I have a night job, I have a family that I want to take care. My investment horizon is extremely long. I'm talking 2 to 3 decades at least, longer if possible. And I practice monthly deductions, dollar cost averaging, and all that. And that's why ETFs are my route instead of single stock picking. Do you feel that a person like me with this kind of it's a very selfish question, by the way, but do you feel that that a person like me would benefit having to inculcate, as you say, 1 to 3% of my investment portfolio into this kind of investment?
So my belief is definitely that digital assets are the way of the future, and I think that everyone should at least get acquainted with it. Right? It doesn't mean that you have to put in a lot of money, right? As I mentioned, that we start the barrier to entry of investing is just RM1, but I think everyone stands to gain a lot by trying to understand this new landscape, almost this new paradigm shift of investing and assets. And I also take note of your earlier point, right? That you may not want to get into the details of like, oh, okay, I need to allocate a certain percentage. I need to monitor my investments. And I think that's why increasingly we are starting to see more and more innovative solutions which actually incorporate digital assets. So for example, I understand that one of the robo-advisors recently in the country, they've already incorporated one of their portfolios, which actually has a little bit of exposure to digital assets. So this means that you do not need to worry about you actually figuring out how to buy, etc. If you invested in that robo-advisor's specific portfolio, you would already have exposure to digital assets. Now, the other way of doing it is, of course, to work with a financial planner. For example, Han Liu and his team are very knowledgeable, and they would also be able to provide some very relevant and useful financial advice on how people can incorporate some digital assets into their portfolios.
All right. Aaron, I want to circle back to that perennial problem that Malaysia is facing right now, which is on wages. This might not necessarily reflect either Luno or digital asset exchanges or even crypto, but this is a story of how Malaysians are actually struggling with not just low income but high debt. Bank Negara in April reported that the household debt to GDP ratio has risen to a new peak of 93.3% as of December last year, from a previous high record of 87.5%. And yet we still have products that provide margin to an asset class. For instance, share margin financing for retail equity customers, to ASB loans for those that might want to think about ASB as an option. On one hand, it's important for us to start to have money and invest. On the other hand, you're quite literally asking people to take on more debt, so much so that with people losing jobs left and right, with the current economic conditions being not, I wouldn't say ultra bad situation, but maybe a high degree of uncertainty following the pandemic. Do you feel that this has to be addressed currently right now? Because I'm also actually reading up or hearing talks of loans to invest in crypto, which is just another form of share margin financing, if you ask me. What's your general thought on this topic?
Yeah, I think overall, I also feel I'm also feeling very disturbed overall by the trends. Things like, for example, many graduates struggling to find jobs, and even those who are finding jobs, they're struggling to get higher income jobs. I think this is an overall trend that we've seen in Malaysia over the past few years. Unfortunately, I don't know if I don't know if I have the answers.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that it's something that definitely it's not good, and I think as a country, together, right, the people, the industry, the regulators, I think we all need to be working closely together to try and transform Malaysia to what they call the high income nation, right? Where we can provide lots of good jobs to young people, older people, and hopefully get to a very, what do you call that? A shared kind of country where everyone can have a chance and be reasonably well off, right? Instead of just a small group of people having a lot of wealth, but everyone else is struggling.
What about those investors that might want to borrow money from friends and family to invest in crypto? What's your message to them?
My message would be, I personally believe that you should never borrow money to invest. Again, that's very personal, and I know some people have made money using margin. However, I will say that most people who borrow to invest probably are not going to do well. So I would say that this is actually quite risky behavior.
Fantastic. Aaron, I would probably check out Luno right after this, and 1 to 3% doesn't sound too bad for me. But yeah, you're right. I take your point. Maybe get acquainted. You are perhaps, like I said, perhaps the third DAX that I've had on my show, or at least the second. So I really want to, instead of talking about it, let's do something about it. Thank you very much. That was Aaron Tang, the Luno Malaysia Country Manager. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad, or look for Luno over there. Until then, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.